Ahoy, and welcome to Titanic Talkline. I am Alexia, and this week I am excited because I am joined by Shayna Abe. Hello, how are you?
Hello. I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty
Oh,
good.
yeah.
For the next 10 seconds, I think my dogs are going to be quiet.
I
But
can't guarantee that my dogs will be at any given time.
yeah, no,
Sorry.
there's no long-term guarantee on this, but I'm really excited to talk to you because as I'm sure you know, being in the Titanic community, there's some like names that continually float around, like the big
Mhm.
ones. And one of those names that does float around quite a bit is Miss Madeline Astor.
Yeah.
And you wrote the book, The Second Mrs. Astor, which is a historical fiction about Madeline and her life, right?
Yes.
How did you? So I know who like it's so weird. People like who's your favorite Titanic person. I'm like that's such a weird word. Like it's a weird
Yeah.
question,
It's
isn't it?
it's a little bit like favorite. Hmm.
Yeah, it's like interesting question. But like for me, I know the answer is Murdoch. But what is it about like I just getting like what is it about Madeline that made you want to write a book? Because like committing to writing a book for any I've never written a book, but I like writing. But it's like committing to write a book is that's a big deal.
Yeah.
You got to really like what you're writing about.
Yes, that's true. And I will be blunt. Titanic was not my idea. It was my publisher's idea, and they
Fair.
went to my agent and said, "Do you know anybody who could write this book?"
Mhm.
And my agent knew that I loved that time period, the Gilded Age, and she came to me and I'm like, I've got it. I've got a great idea. I've got a great idea. And they said it could be anybody on Titanic, fictional or real. So I decided to just take a shot and do a fictional and a real person. So I chose Madeline, and then I invented a fictitious teenage girl stowaway
Mhm.
from Ireland at the last port of call. And my publisher came back and said, lose the stowaway, but write about Madeline. She's very interesting. Yeah,
I don't
she's a
like
little
your original ideas. How about you just
right,
use the ones that
right.
already exist?
I like
Thanks,
this stowaway. I
Jan.
was like, I can do so much with a stowaway, but all right now. But
You just put
Madeline
that in
turned
your
out to
pocket
be,
for later. That sounds like a
yeah,
really
right,
fun story.
right. So, yeah, I was interested in Madeline because I didn't know that much about her at
Hmm.
first, just the bare bones of her story. And the more I learned about her, the more I'm like, how come people aren't talking about her more? How come we don't remember who she was and
Hmm.
how famous she was during her time, you know, considering now like people don't really think about her so much, or
Hmm.
they didn't maybe before the book. But I thought she was a very interesting character. I thought the story of her and Jack together, their scandal and their love and the tragedy, of course, that he died and she lived while
Hmm.
she was 5 months pregnant with their son. It was just very touching. I mean, it was almost like a story that just basically wrote itself, and I just
Hmm.
had to do the research
I
to
gotta
find.
say that just as a global statement out into the world, I don't necessarily condone people in their 40s and 50s dating people in their teens. Just like I feel like morally, I feel as though I should put that out in the world. Like I don't necessarily know if I encourage that kind
Yeah.
of relationship because I've done the math like 38 times and then every time I freaking forget. He at the time of because they met when she was 15, 15,
No,
14,
no, they met when she was 17.
17. Sorry, I was like I'm really bad with
Yeah.
name. And he at the
Yeah.
time of their meeting was in is like 45, 40.
He was 29 years older than she. So
Okay.
you do that math because I can't do math in my
I'm really
head.
bad at math. So let's see. 30 plus 7, 47, 46. Okay.
Okay.
So I mean, I mean, and this is not to say that all people, all relationships with age gaps are toxic. It's just as a global rule, if you are 19 and most 46-year-olds approach you, I would say, as a
Yeah.
general rule, please proceed with caution. They could be
Yes.
great men, and if they are the exceptions to the rule because there are, of course, great men of all ages.
That's true.
Um, but even in today's age, and even back then as well, when it was a little bit more common to have, older men and younger women together,
Mhm.
their relationship, as you mentioned, was still like quite the scandal, actually.
It wasn't just the age, it was the fact that he was recently divorced from
Mm-hmm.
Ala. And they had a miserable marriage, but they were of the social circle where divorce was just not a thing that people did.
Right.
And so the fact that they decided to do it anyway after his mother died, that took everyone aback. I mean, they're like, why can't you just lead separate lives and separate continents?
Mm-hmm.
But they didn't want to do that. They really disliked each other very much. So much so that, it was rumored that their daughter was not even his child. I don't know if that's true or not.
But I
So
mean, if
yeah,
the rumors are going around, that's enough to suggest like whether or not that's true. As you mentioned, it's kind of like that. Just it rumors don't come out of nowhere. There was public disrest in the marriage.
yes, yes. Everybody, from what I understand, everybody knew they were just miserable together. And he was kind of considered to be this kind of grumpy, sour, reclusive guy until he got divorced. And then he started coming out of his shell a bit. Yeah. I know, right?
I saw a TikTok recently where a woman says, "Have you ever been in a relationship so toxic when it ended, people started congratulating you?" It sounds like that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Oh my God. Anyway, yeah. If you're married, I can say this firsthand. If you're married to the wrong person,
Mhm.
divorce is a relief. It is a relief. And so I get
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, no, there's a YouTuber I really like named Luxaria, and she said something once that was like, it's not a failed marriage, it's a successful divorce.
Exactly. Exactly. I think that's totally true.
Yeah,
So he, after the divorce, he
the
started going to
successful
parties.
divorce.
A successful divorce. He started just coming out of his shell a bit more and smiling more and telling jokes. And people were like, "Who's this guy?" So
A free man.
and that is when he met Madeline. And you can imagine how kind of intoxicating that was for him to suddenly have this very pretty young girl, just girl, I hate to say that word, young woman, will say, this debutante,
I'd
right?
say 19 is still a girl. I think that's actually being
Yeah,
fairly generous. That's not to say that teenagers are children, but 19
right.
is still that's
Yeah,
really young,
yeah,
especially at that time when you were very sheltered.
right. Yeah, she
There's
was
a
super
there's an
sheltered.
yeah, and there's an additional element of like naivete and youngness. I'd say that's pretty fair to say that Madeline would have been a girl at that point.
So yes, so he meets her. She genuinely likes him. She genuinely is interested in what he has to say. She's not dismissive or rude, or there's no antagonism between them. It just must have been so refreshing and wonderful for him and for her.
Yeah.
I mean, she's basically just making her debut, and here's this famous, sophisticated older man paying attention to her and interested in what she has to say. I will say that in all my research, I never came across anything except in the scandal sheets suggesting that she was a gold digger and he was like a
Mm-hmm.
pervert or whatever. Their firsthand accounts through their friends suggest that they were just totally smitten with each other, like it was a mutual infatuation with each other. So I I choose to believe that that is the truth.
Mm-hmm.
We'll never know for sure, but I think that
Sure.
is the truth. I think that after his death, she was genuinely devastated, and she just had to soldier on without him because she
Mm-hmm.
didn't have a choice. But I mean, she was never the same again. So
No, I can imagine there's two things at play at that night. Number one is just escaping a shipwreck
yeah,
is a harrowing ordeal, and then to lose your husband
right.
is a completely separate ideal. And I don't remember the time. Did she know that she was pregnant on the voyage, or was that something she discovered really quickly after? Oh, she was. She knew she was pregnant. I've yep,
Yeah, she was 5 months pregnant
yep,
on the
yep. So
voyage.
it's you're losing your husband and the father of your impending is not the word that I wanted, but like your forthcoming child.
Right, right. You're
That's an incredible trio of loss.
yes, yes. I mean, I can only imagine how grief stricken she was. On top of that, was the press following her around, and suddenly she was the girl widow. That was actually from the headlines that I read, the tragic girl widow. So
That's
suddenly
what I
she
want
had
printed on my
secret.
gravestone. What kind of macabre nonsense is that? My
No doubt.
goodness. I mean, it's not. It's like it's funny now, but it's like I'm just thinking back, like if I'm pretending when I was like 20 years old. Firstly, you have no grasp of your emotions. You are still developing at 20.
Right,
You
right.
are a widow with a baby, and people are following you around, calling you the girl widow. I would have lost my mind.
I don't know how she held it together, except I mean, she was lucky that she had her family
Yeah.
to support her.
Mm-hmm.
That was her anchor, I guess, besides, before, or rather after his death. He was her anchor and then they were. So yeah,
Yeah.
she did have them. But still, it must have been just unimaginable in some way to have to navigate that series of events in that world. And then, she never, for the rest of her life, the press never left her alone just because of that, just because she was married to Jack and they were on Titanic. So,
You see a little bit of this. I've been pulling a lot of pop culture references for this episode, but I'm 33, so I remember one of the big sort of pop culture moments involving the press and paparazzi was the Britney Spears. I don't want to say meltdown because that's really unfair to her, but it was this sort of witness. It was the continual harassment of a woman in crisis,
right, exactly.
and I kind of get the sense that that's what happened with Madeline. And it's sort of like whether or not you think she was or wasn't a gold digger or whatever. It's like you endorse I find it hard to believe that those people would still endorse harassing her. It's like, no matter what the outcome would be, it's like that was a young widow and a young mother
Mhm.
doing her best. And it's like that again, just must have been super difficult because you're never left alone to process things. And it's super important to process.
Yeah.
And I talk about this a few times on my show, and that they didn't have better help in 1912. She couldn't pick up her phone and dial a therapist and just be like,
Right.
hey, I'm having a really hard time right now. Do you have time to talk? But
Right.
it wasn't how things were for her.
Yeah. Yeah. It, like I said, it must have been just trauma after trauma after
Mm-hmm.
trauma. I can't imagine it myself. I mean, I was writing it and
Mm-hmm.
thinking, dang, when I was doing the research for the story, up until from the moment she got engaged till after the ship sank, except for the a brief period when they were on their honeymoon, I was able to track through newspaper articles basically every step she took in public, like where she went, who she was with, what she ate, where she ate, what she wore, what she bought in the jewelry store or whatever. Yeah, I mean,
That's kind of
she was.
gross.
It must have been so invasive and so horrifying. There's a little bit in the story about how a photographer approaches her father trying to get a picture, and he chases the guy off with his stick, and the photographer gets that shot. And that's really true. I mean, that's what they were doing to her whole
Good.
family. When they couldn't find her, they would go after them. I mean, that was, in a sense, that was them doing their job. That was their bread and
Sure.
butter. And
Sure.
just like paparazzi today, harassing famous people,
Mm-hmm.
trying to get that one shot, that one really great shot where they can make a lot of money.
Yeah. I,
So
I'm not a big fan of celebrity culture. If anyone gets me alone for more than 12 seconds and asks me about it, I will just go off about it. I'm like, why do we give so much attention to these people? And because at the end of the day, I think it boils down to, for me in my brain, I'm like, they're people.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
not trying to be mean, but it's like, what's so special about those people? But at the end of the
exactly.
day, I'm like, they're people, leave them alone. Like, I may not like certain celebrities, but it's like, do I think that the people should be hanging outside their window staring in? Absolutely not. Let them eat their fucking
Yeah.
lunch. Like, it's I mean, it's
I
bloody ridiculous. It's like he's like, some of the shots they take. It's like, dude, he's tucking in his shirt. You can't
yeah.
tuck in your shirt into your jeans in private anymore. That's bananas to me. Like, is that even a good shot for you? Is that a good shot? Good lord. And oh my god, this I play roller derby, and so people will take, you take action shots, and not every shot. If you've ever seen like those Olympic photos of like faces of the Olympics,
Yeah,
not every photo is a flattering photo,
that is
and
certainly true.
and some of them are just funny and you can laugh about them, but some of them are embarrassing. Do you think about this photo of this man running down after a reporter with a stick? I'm sure this is a funny story. It's like, dude, look at this crazy man. It's like, but you think about it, it's like, how long have you been harassing his daughter?
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
sure, this is a funny picture of a man with a stick, but it's also like frustrated father defends harrowed daughter.
right, exactly. Yeah,
Harrowed isn't a
showing
word.
story behind things. Yeah.
Yeah. When you were doing this research on Madeline, and just before you even started writing, was there anything that you found, I mean, not even like groundbreaking historically, but anything that you found out about her that you thought was like really interesting, or just like a personal detail about her that was like, oh, that's really cool?
Um, I thought the bit about the Zingara was very interesting, about the
Mm-hmm.
fact that she and Jack actually rescued those bankers on a sloop
Mm-hmm.
before Titanic. I was like, really? Really? And she was quoted in the paper saying, it was so exciting. I've never seen a shipwreck before. And I was like, oh
You
God,
poor
poor
thing.
shipping.
uh
And the bit about Kitty running away in Egypt, when I wrote that, that actually happened too.
mm-hmm.
When I wrote that, I was, you can, listeners, you can't tell, but I have a lot of dogs in the room, even with me at this moment. There's one on my lap. They're in the background. They're
Oh,
everywhere. Anyway, I was writing about Kitty,
hi
and
puppy.
yes, if I don't hold her, she cries. Um,
Oh,
what was? Oh, I was saying
kitty,
yes. So
kitty ran away.
the bit about Kitty getting lost really tugged at me emotionally as I was writing it, and then as I was writing her rescue, even I was feeling like, oh, thank God, Kitty's okay. And then I'm like, oh no, Kitty's going on Titanic. It's going to be really bad. So that part I thought was pretty interesting. A lot of people said, Kitty the dog. Oh yes, Kitty. Every picture I found of Madeline and Jack outside while they were courting, and then while they were engaged, every one of them pretty much had Kitty somewhere in it. And at first sometimes you might not even notice her. It'll just be like her tail behind Jack's leg or
Sure.
her face peeking around him, but she stayed with them all the time. So the kitty part really affected me. Not that the people didn't, but what else did I find surprising about Madeline? Let me think. Um, I don't know what I found surprising. I just found her interesting. I
Ooh,
found that she
interesting then. What are some interesting things about her as a human? I like human story, like even silly ones. My favorite story that I've heard so far on the show is about the Paracchio brothers and the tie and silk flower that were made for them by their mother. It's like little personal stories.
oh
If
yeah.
you have you if you haven't heard that story, it super quickly. They worked at the a la carte restaurant on Titanic, and before they left, their mom made one of them a silk um, rose, I think, and the other a silk tie, and told them wear these whenever you're happy, or if you get your photo taken, so that you can have a picture with them. And they did. There is photos of both of them wearing them, and unfortunately, both of them passed on the Titanic. But I like that story because it's
Yeah.
it shows that they had a nice relationship with their mom.
Yes, yes. I that is a sweet story. I did not know that one.
It's cute.
I guess what I found about interesting about Madeline is that she was perceived to be one thing, but in reality, she must have been something very different. She was perceived to be this weak, pretty, vapid girl who married for money. When in fact, I think she was intelligent, athletic, in love, and genuinely, I don't want to say destroyed entirely, but her life was never the same, and her love was never the same, and
Mm-hmm.
she never really recovered from that, and that's what a lot of people said about her. um, I thought it was interesting that at 5 months pregnant she helped row away from the ship and she helped row back. I mean, I think,
Rowing is hard.
yeah, rowing is hard, and she was 5 months pregnant, but she was one of the people who could do it, so she did it. And I'm like, well, that's pretty heroic.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, I think the press came around to her in a less than genuine way
Mm-hmm.
after Titanic, but it still was a closer approximation of who she really was than what they were calling her before.
Mm-hmm.
So Madeline was a complex person. She made good choices, she made bad choices, just like all of us. And I tried to portray her in a very human way in the story because she wasn't just this caricature, and neither was
Mm-hmm.
he. Even though it would be very easy and very lazy to paint them in those colors, I don't think they were like that at all. So
Did you see? I will also admit that I have not seen this film in its entirety. The 1979 movie SOS Titanic.
I've seen clips of it. I haven't seen it in its entirety either.
So
I did
two,
see. Sorry,
yeah.
go ahead.
I was gonna say they follow a variety of people, but two of the people they follow are the Astors.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I remember seeing that and thinking, I think that's the one where at some point she's talking to some other character and the character was like, "Oh, I don't know what to do about my love. Why is it working out for you and Jack?" And then she says something like, "Oh yes, Jack's sons have finally accepted me." And I'm like, "What the heck are you talking about? Jack doesn't have sons at this point. He's got one boy, and no, he never accepted her." So I mean, I started to get a little frustrated, and I think that's the danger of the more you do the research, the more you know, the more you're like, that's not true. Don't do it
Right.
like that.
I think that movie made me laugh my head off for way too many reasons, but one of them was that there was two things about the portrayal of Madeline and Jack, and also, and I will again, I have not seen this movie through in its entirety, so I could
Yeah.
be wrong. Number one, and number two, I kind of wasn't paying all that much attention. But there was a scene that I remember where the two of them were in their cabins, and I remember the scene in particular because they made her look really young, which was actually
Yeah.
something I liked because some of the other portrayals kind of try to age her up and they try to age him down a little bit. But this was very much like this is what a man of that time would have, maybe looked like. The costuming was completely out of their minds, though. But one thing that I noticed about their interactions was that it was very sincere and warm between the two
Yeah.
actors,
Yeah.
at
If it's
least.
the one I'm thinking of, I think they made him look like he was in his 60s.
He
I
definitely looked a bit like Chopin.
Yeah, yeah.
It is. We were talking about the same one.
I think so,
Uh,
yeah.
it had oh mother of God, Cloris Leachman, was she in it, or am I missing it up with somebody else? I think it was Cloris Leachman,
I think you might be right.
but she
I'm
looked a
sorry.
bit
Like I
like she
said, I've
was.
only seen pieces of it, so
Well, she was pretty memorable. She was wearing some crazy ensemble and acting a lot like what I imagine like a caricature of a cabaret lady would be, but like dressed up of that time. It was really
Was
interesting
she supposed to be
behavior.
Margaret Brown?
Yes.
Oh God, that's so offensive. I mean, I'm a
How did
Colorado
you
girl.
know?
I started going to the Molly Brown House Museum when I was in elementary school. They call it that because that's what
Uh,
people know her by these days.
yeah,
But every
yeah.
time I hear the Cameron movie and the
They all
voiceover
called her
over says,
Molly.
"Yeah, call her Molly," I'm like, "No, you don't. No, you
No.
didn't.
And that's
Stop it."
another one of those weird Cameron facts that like they stick with people
Yeah, yeah.
because that
But I mean,
movie was so rooted in fact that everything was treated as a fact.
right, exactly. I know
Yeah,
why he did it because
sure.
even my editor, when I turned in my manuscript, she's like, "Margaret Brown. Are you trying to say Molly Brown?" I'm like, "Yes, that's who you think she is, but she's Margaret Brown."
Yeah.
So I
Molly,
think that
for any listener who doesn't know, she only became Molly in postmortem.
in the 50s, I think it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway,
Well, it was just one of the interesting things that, like I said, so much else about that movie was well researched.
right.
That
Yeah.
things that it happened with Murdoch as well, and that's actually what got me into Titanic. Was, I watched the movie, I like Murdoch a lot, and then oh, he took a bribe and then killed a man and shot himself. Isn't that a tragic story? And then I just kind of moved along with my life, and then later on, I realized that that was embellished for the
Right.
film. And
Right.
it's kind of like, well, here I was just thinking that that was a fact, and it didn't affect my opinion of the man. It's
Right.
also, it was 80, it had been 84 years since it had happened. But it was like, it didn't make me think, ah, damn, what an asshole. It was mostly just like, well, that's sad, and oof, what a horrible way to go out. But then I got older and realized that that may not have been the truth. And the same thing with the Molly thing, where I'm just kind of like, see, it's these little tiny details where
Yeah.
even though it's not, does it really matter whether we called her Margaret or Molly? I suppose in the grand scheme of things, no. But it is important to have the details right because
Yeah.
they build credence for the other parts.
Exactly. Exactly. And I understand what Cameron did and why he did it.
Yeah,
But I also knew that there was no way I was going to do that. And
right.
people, if you don't know who Margaret Brown is, just Google it. It's not hard. She survived the Titanic.
Yeah, Margaret
Yeah.
Brown Titanic. It's pretty easy. But I imagine that that's probably pretty hard too whenever you write anything Titanic related, especially after 97, 98, is that
Yeah.
it does inherently draw Cameron
Yeah.
comparisons.
Yeah. I I was a little bit like to the publishers. I'm like, you want to revisit Titanic? Okay. And I think actually it turned out for me to be a very good thing. And I think the the enormous impact that the movie Cameron's movie had on the market and on say social consciousness made a lot of writers, fiction writers like me, just go, oh, I don't want to touch that. It's basically done.
Right.
But fortunately for me, it wasn't all done, and I was able to find Madeline and Jack, two people who were super famous and super scandalous and had a very interesting and very sad story together, and it hadn't been told yet. So I got very lucky, honestly, and I know that.
I have a bit of a non-Titanic, but more of a writing question. So I don't do historical fiction personally. I think it's like it's too hard. There's research, and I have to make sure everything's true. Ugh. But how do you go about starting the process of creating historical fiction, knowing that you will have to change little things here and there just to make it your own? Like, where do you make those decisions, or do you not make those decisions and you're just like, I'm only going to go off the fact, I'm not going to embellish at all?
It depends on your subject. Obviously, with Titanic,
Fair.
there's, as you know, a ton of information out there about it. Some of it is credible, some of it isn't. So
Also
you have
true.
to be, yeah, you have to be very careful that you're using something that is reliable instead of just people speculating about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and with Madeline, like I said, for a certain period of her life, she was extremely well documented in the papers, and I was able to
Mm-hmm.
go off of that. But once they went on their honeymoon, I didn't have a record of where they went. I had records of where other people went, and so I retraced their footsteps there. And
Mm-hmm.
I made sure the hotels were real, and the boats were real, and the ruins were real with the real things at the ruins and things like that they would have seen. So you you fill in the gaps that you don't have using your best hypothesis basically. Um, you have to walk this fine line between, I want to create an interesting story, but I want it to be an accurate, interesting story.
Mm-hmm.
Like for my next upcoming book, which is not Titanic related, it was a different lady, and her later years were extremely well documented, and her past was extremely obscured on purpose. She basically erased all mentions of her from the time she was born till the time she was well, a wealthy man's mistress. But yeah, so I had to dig very deep to figure out what her life had likely been like before she sort of catapulted into infamy. Um, there's no records to say that I'm wrong, but there's no records to say that I'm right either. But it is my best guess, and it is rooted in accuracy of what could have happened. So to answer your question, it depends on your topic, and
Mm-hmm.
it depends on how far you're willing to go. Like I tried to make everything in the second Mrs. Astor true. I actually can't think of anything that I made up.
Mm-hmm.
It was all true. Just conversations. Obviously, I have to generate those with my
Right.
imagination, but things like that. But the facts and the events were all there. So,
I imagine that sometimes it's just superfluous details that you make up, things like what the room may have looked like, or what flowers might have been in a vase, or
right.
what color
Yes.
somebody's dress was.
Exactly. That stuff is, unless you have photographic
Sure.
evidence. In 1912, there wasn't a lot of that, but or just
No.
letters and things. But yeah, stuff like that. Like I didn't know exactly what Madeline would be wearing at any given time, so I went off the Titanic style book. I think that's what
Mm-hmm.
I mentioned it in my author's notes. Anyway, they have Charlotte Cardassa's list of everything that sunk in her trunks on Titanic, and it was like it was a total boon for me because I knew exactly what fashionable ladies would be wearing, where they got it, and how much it cost.
Yeah.
Thanks to her. So stuff like that.
It's interesting because I think I saw something online that said like a historian's like best find is the journal of a nosy neighbor
Yeah.
because they document all those mundane details of, I was thinking the other day about like if suddenly, if we vanished today and suddenly 100 years from now someone walked into our house and they saw a bunch of stuff that was here, it's like, would they know like what it was? Or because things may have changed since then, because I
Yeah.
don't remember the example that I saw somewhere, but it was something like ancient Romans, they or some society had three shakers on their table, salt, pepper, and an unidentified third one, but
Huh.
no one knows what it is because whatever it was just so common, people didn't specify what it was. It was just like the third shaker because everyone was just like, yeah, that's the hickball spice or whatever it was, but like it's so common, you just don't write it down.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or they solve the mystery of this. I think this one is definitively Roman, where they couldn't figure out how they made this particular cement because they would replicate the recipe and it just said water. But then finally, someone was like, they lived by the sea, add seawater. And they did. And they're like, oh, got it. But no one wrote down seawater because at the
Right.
time it was like, well, we don't have filtered water. What other water are we?
Yeah. Yeah. Little tiny historical things that you unearth, and you're like, oh, that's interesting. So yeah, I had to learn a lot about Bar Harbor for this book, and I've never been to Bar Harbor, but fortunately there is a historical society there, and they have tons of postcards from the era and interesting images and the history of the town. So I learned a lot that I did not know before.
That's really
So that's
awesome.
always fun. I like stuff like that, learning new things.
So do I. You said during those time period that when she was really well documented, what was she? I mean, obviously she was well documented. What was she doing during those times? Just living her life?
She was during those times. I'm talking in particular about right as the engagement
Mm-hmm.
was announced. Suddenly she was living her life, but her life was like going shopping or going to have breakfast somewhere or going with her sister somewhere. I mean, it was what you would consider it to be until
Mm-hmm.
she got a little bit cannier and they started slipping out, trying to get around without the press finding them. Like right before they got married, the whole family just did this kind of sneaky number to get onto Jack's yacht because the press was, on top of everything.
Yeah.
So they all scattered and went different directions and then met on the yacht. So really by the time the press figured out what was going on, the yacht was sailing away.
Bye.
Yeah, but they were of course waiting for them at his
At the
estate
port.
anyway, but still their escape was to get on the yacht, and I don't blame her for wanting to just get away from everybody and get away from all that constant attention and people shouting questions at her. And trying to describe what she was wearing and if she smiled or if she didn't smile, or what she was doing, and was she worthy of him, or was he a terrible person for doing this. I can
Oh,
imagine she needed that escape. Yes.
how long were they actually married? Because
Seven months.
I was gonna say it was not a very long time.
No, it's pretty sad to think about. Yeah, I'm sure that. I mean, of course, I'm sure nobody thought that Jack would die so quickly in the marriage, and that is reflected in the prenuptial agreement that she signed, and the money she ended up getting after he died, and the money that her child Jakey ended up getting.
Mm-hmm.
He only got $300,000 out of all the millions, and Vincent got most of it. But I'm sure I want to think that Jack would have gone back and revisited that will, or that proviso, and given Jakey more money. But it was just the prenuptial thing saying any child I may have will get this amount. But it
Mm-hmm.
was just a speculation thing. So yeah, 7 months, not a very long time. Still definitely literally in your honeymoon phase.
Yeah, seriously. And especially after he just, she just entered society, he just left a marriage. I'm sure that it was kind of almost like a double reawakening for, both of them. It's like we just hit the scene and now we're in a great relationship. It's like, wow, this is great.
What could go wrong?
Yeah, yeah. So people should stop saying that.
No.
It's like you're not allowed to say that out loud anymore.
Oh, that's the other thing that I've learned that I did not know before, is that on their trip to Egypt, Margaret Brown really did go with them, and she
Yeah.
was a good friend of theirs. And I was so happy to learn that after going to the Margaret Brown house so many times. I didn't. I guess I knew it before, but maybe I just forgot because I was a kid. But I'm like, oh, Margaret Brown, you rock. So I was happy to be able to include her prominently in the story because
Margaret seemed
she
very
was.
cool, all
Yeah,
accounts.
yeah. I think she was definitely a hero.
It was it definitely said something of the time to be, of new money yourself and to be the one. You broke the social barrier yourself and now you're breaking the other ones. You're going to socialize with a divorcee, you're going to socialize with his new wife. Quite the scandal.
Yeah.
It's, all these things that you're going to do. And she's just like, what are you going to do, sue me, go for it.
Exactly.
Like,
She,
it's not illegal to do what she was doing.
yeah, it was just unpopular,
Yeah. And
not the norm. Yeah.
well, they touched on that slightly in, oh man, I think it was SOS Titanic. Who who was the guy with the mistress, Madame Aubert? Was that Guggenheim?
Was it Guggenheim?
Yes. Okay.
Okay.
Because there was a scene in SOS Titanic where like Guggenheim and Astor sit together at a bar and he's like, I'm glad you're not forsaking me. And Guggenheim's like, why would I? We're both men in a similar position. And they like cheers to being, off cast. It's a very interesting situation, but
Yes.
it did kind of like, I don't necessarily think that there would have been public declarations or snubs of Astor. I think socially at the time it would not have been acceptable.
I did read an anecdote that after the divorce, he one of the society hostesses to a party he went to had somebody sit by him that she knew was his friend. She's like, I don't want anybody to cut him, so will you stay with him and just make sure that he's going to be all right? So yeah.
That surprises me, if only because people, especially at that time, reputation in society was everything. It just, I personally would not risk snubbing the Astors. I just don't think that I would do. I don't think that I'd want to be the one to do it, even if Jack was a good guy. I'd be like, nah, man, I am not putting out the snub on Jack Astor. It's just like, I'm not going to do that, even if I didn't like him. It'd be like, of the time, I'm simply baffled because you just didn't do that.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
But
but that scene in the movie made me consider, it's like, even if they didn't do it in public, I'm sure that there were a lot of people that were very like whisper 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 about
yes,
it.
yes, there's no question about that. Yeah, and the tabloids kept whipping that up over and over again, so he wasn't getting away from that. So
Sucks.
yeah.
I mean, again, even no matter if you think that anyone deserves that or not, like whether or not you agree with a person, or is like you agree with his decision to date someone that young or whatever, whether you agree with it, it's like, I don't necessarily know. There's not many people in this world that I would say deserve to be hounded and dragged through the mud. There are some people.
Yeah.
There are definitely some people where it's like, you are getting what you deserve.
Exactly.
But for the most part, I start to think that at a certain point, I'm like, I think that the punishment of harassing certain people far outweighs whatever perceived crime
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that's been that has occurred.
Everything can go too far. That's for
Mm-hmm.
sure. Yeah. It's just
And
social bullying again. Then that's a problem everywhere.
we saw that happening, and I think we've only recently begun to talk about in the past 10 years or so with the everything that happened to Monica Lewinsky.
Yes, yes, yes. Poor Monica Lewinsky.
Poor Monica Lewinsky, indeed. And, and even the whole thing happened when I was like 8 or 9 years old. So I was a child. But, the way it was handled, I kind of grew up thinking that, Monica Lewinsky was it's a bad name. It's a bad name. It's a bad thing. You do bad things if you're a Monica Lewinsky. You're a bad person.
Yeah.
And then I got older and
She's some sort of a sexual joke kind of thing.
yeah. And then I got older and I turned 23. And then I got older than 23.
Yeah.
And now I'm 10 years past 23, which is not old. Again, I want to impact that. I'm not trying to be like, look at me and my sage wisdom. It's just 10 years is a long, it's a far away from any age. People took advantage of me a lot when I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
I was sexually assaulted in my early 20s. There's a lot, but this is the kind of things where, or I would be dismissed by people just because, you're a young girl in a public situation. You'd make an opinion and people would just like completely 180 that one. They're like, and you're going out the window. But it's that sort of dismissiveness about it. And I just remember thinking, they were really mean. Can you imagine? Like, I've been in a situation where it's been hard to say no, and it was not the president of the United States. This was someone who was like just in the scheme of, in the sliding scale of power. If the president is at 100, we're dealing with a human being like me that is in the 2s and the 3s in terms of impact. And I can only imagine what it must be like to have it's not your boss, it's not your boss's boss, it's your boss's 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 boss. This is the president of our country.
Yeah.
And you're just supposed to be like, Mr. President, you're a married man. That is so unprofessional. I cannot believe you would approach me in such a way. I'm horrified and I am leaving.
Yeah.
Like, that's the kind of thing that happens in a Lifetime film, but in real life, you don't think like that. And then we yanked her by the hair through the mud.
Yeah.
Over and over and over and over and over again. And it's just at a certain point, it's like, even if you are so moral that you think adultery is the worst thing you can do and that both parties should be punished, you have to think, it's like, did she deserve all that?
No.
Did she? Because that was a lot. That's more than anyone should ask to go through.
Blaming. It's very clearly victim blaming. I'm really glad that she's come out on the other side and is doing apparently well. I don't know her that well. I don't know her at all, really, but she seems like she's doing well, and I'm happy for her.
Same. Yeah. I think I saw her on John Oliver's when she did an interview, and she was saying that somebody once wrote a tweet that was like, "Who the hell is Monica Lewinsky?" She wrote back saying, "I'm the person that hundreds of rap songs have been written about." And she said she once went to a 90s party, like many, 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 many years later. And finally, for the first time in her life, she put on a little black beret and went for a 90s party. And it's just like, it's incredible to be someone who goes through something like that and comes out on the other side. And I'm bringing that up because what happened to Monica Lewinsky is an extreme example. Most people do not end up tangling with massive political powers and scandals. But it is similar in a way to what happened to Madeline, and that her only crime was getting married.
Yes. Well,
that's not the crime in quotation marks.
No, I know. I agree with you exactly. I think the crime would be that she fell in love with this rich, older, powerful man and then married him.
What a hussy.
Exactly. Yes. And she didn't need the money.
I said a misogynistic word and my dog's yelling at me about it. Good girl. It was a joke. But still. I mean, it seemed, as you said, the crime was I fell in love with somebody.
Yes, that's your horrible thing that you've done, and that's why you deserve to be hounded for the rest of your life, which she was. Yeah.
And it's just he's got a lot to say about that too.
Your dog has an opinion about this. My God,
has an opinion about Mrs. Astor, which is, but clearly you did too, and in a way, and that's a good thing in its own way, because as I keep saying over and over on the show, Titanic is a human story, and Madeline was one of those humans.
Yes, exactly.
And oh my God, I'm gonna try to yell this story if she keeps barking, just because it's kind of important. But I went to a Titanic convention last August. I say convention, but it was more like a conference, and I don't say that to be derogatory, but just to give an idea of the scope of the size. It was a smaller, more intimate thing. So there's about 25 to 30 people total. And one of them was Paul Burns, who does a lot of work with the museum and with artifacts and curation. And he brought for us to see Madeline's Life Vest.
Oh yeah, I heard about that.
So is Princess. But I think there was a couple things that I found so interesting. Princess! Really? Jesus. About
I'm
this
surprised
life.
my dogs aren't barking at your dog.
I think maybe they're just as appalled by her behavior as I am. But I think there was something that surprised me, and this is why I feel as though historical fiction and portrayals of history are important, is that I had never considered what a lifeboat. Give me one second. I'm gonna put this dog outside.
Okay, no problem.
You're done. Come on. Go out. Out the door. Jesus Christ. Funny, because I didn't even hear her come in, so that surprised me. But I'm a very visual person, and I've been boating or what have you before, and had like a life vest on or what have you, and it's foamy and puffy and made out of that uncomfortable fabric. Mm-hmm. I had never seen in person really a lifeboat belt from 1912. Firstly, it was small. It was smaller than I thought it was going to be.
Was it?
And yes, it was narrower than I thought.
Oh, narrow, yeah.
It was narrower than I thought. Like if I put it on, viewers who can't see me, you wear a vest and it kind of goes into your armpits. If I had put on her life belt, I think it would have been sort of like right in the middle of my chest. It was much smaller, and it was made out of very firm cork.
Yeah.
I had thought the cork would have more give, like an egg carton, stiff, but a little bit of give. It was very, very hard, and the canvas was scratchy. I had the privilege of, I asked if I could touch it because I'm a tactile human. They said yes. And I almost absolutely ruined it because they were like, yeah, it's preserved so well because, didn't go in the water. Madeline made it into a lifeboat. She did not get into the water. There was no seawater on it. And I almost cried on it, which would have, instantly undid all of that preservation work. But it was really interesting to look at and see just how much things have changed. Like as something as silly as a life vest has changed so profoundly. And not only that, but Madeline's life vest didn't necessarily save her life. She got into a lifeboat. She was very fortunate. But there were many other people whose survival was hinged on something that small.
Yeah. I think I made a point of saying that at some point in the story, that, it wasn't reassuring that the last thing between the people on this beautiful ship and death was tree bark.
Yeah.
I think maybe the cork was hard because it was old. I mean, honestly, I just knew it was cork. And so for me, like you, I envision cork as having a little squish to it, but maybe not.
It did not. I will also say this was 100-some-year-old cork. So It could have. And I didn't. It was a historical artifact. I did not give it a great squeeze. I did.
Not a big old honk and squeeze.
No, I didn't pick it up and it wasn't that. It was not at a strip club. It was very much like a very awkward poke. Just kind of I was like, what is this like? And then I was very surprised. I was like, wait, this feels more like the pages of a book.
Huh. That's interesting.
Very dense, extremely uncomfortable.
So you're the only person I've ever known who has actually seen her vest in person and touched it. That's awesome.
It was a pretty wild experience. And like I said, I definitely almost ruined it. But just weeping all over it. Because it was like, oh my
God,
probably
would have tackled you before you wept over it.
I think they might have just laughed at me, honestly. Like, look at that loser. It was interesting because in the same way that when I read, something like your book, it brings these things into my mind and makes it easier to understand. I'm like, oh, this is what a life vest was like. It wasn't this pliable, pseudo uncomfortable thing. It was really uncomfortable. Yeah. It was as inflexible as it could be. And you read your story and I have to remember, it's like, she was 19 years old. She wasn't used to this world. And,
she was 18 on Titanic. She was 19 when she gave birth to Jakey. Yeah.
It's still young.
Yeah.
Exactly. This young woman who just in that glowing hope of life. I know that's a really weird way of saying it, but it's like
No.
you're old enough where you're like, I'm going to balls, and it's like I get to drink it. I get to drink champagne and sit at the grown-ups table now. Like
Yeah.
I'm a woman. I'm on the scene. Things are happening for me, and I like reading historical fiction. Sometimes I find textbooks a little dry, so I really
Mhm.
like reading books like yours because it helps me also to picture that world better, but it connects you to the people that were there. And I
Yeah.
didn't know a lot about Madeline, and I'd never, this is going to sound like a strange sentence, but I'd never considered her as a person.
Yeah. Well, I mean, she was very much in the shadow of her extremely famous husband. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
you say John Jacob Astor, people know who that is usually, you know. And then if you say, and who was his wife? They're like,
Mrs. Astor.
yes, exactly. They know who his mother was. If they know the era, they know Lena Astor, the Mrs. Astor, and they know Jack. And if they know even more about that, then they know about Ava because she was a
Mm-hmm.
very socially prominent person as well. But then what people know about Madeline is just, if they know anything, it's usually just like, oh, she was so young and what were they doing being married and how dare they? And, you know, that's about it. So, but there's, you know, they were human beings, like you said, and they had intricate, an intricate and tragic and beautiful story that I felt would make I enjoyed researching it, even though it was ultimately very sad.
Yeah,
I enjoyed getting to know them as human beings, and I tried to make their humanity come across on the page instead
I
of
think you
making them
did.
just caricatures.
I think
The
you
rich man
did
and his pretty trophy bride, you know.
because it would have been easy to do that.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
easy and lazy. Yeah,
easy
yeah,
and lazy, and it turns it into its own trope to be like
yes,
you're basically writing a historical version of the Playboy Mansion story at that point in time, where it's like this the stereotypical old lech and the hot young girl.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, it's been told over and over and over again. But there, as you know, we discussed, there are examples of people that do, meet and have genuine love stories. And yes, it's not common. And if you are 19 and a 46-year-old comes up to you and says that you're beautiful, would you like to go for a ride? You say no and you run away. Um,
except consider their circumstances. She knew who he was. He wasn't a stranger, and
I was gonna say if it's not a
yeah,
stranger, it's different. Like consider the
yeah,
people. But then if it turns out that this man is actually really, really nice and he's respectful and just wanted directions, you don't need to scream and
yes,
run away. But
yeah,
use your diligence and I always feel like I have to, as an adult in 2023, I'm like, please say responsible things online, including like if you're a teenager, please don't go chasing after people intentionally in their 40s and 50s. Um, but in their case, and in some cases, there are obviously those love stories that do manage to make it succeed. And at least the way that it was described historically and the way that I read it in your book, it did seem like they were just two people that happened to find each other.
mhm,
And it's really unfortunate that it didn't last.
yeah.
It's
And we don't know what
unfortunate.
would have happened if it had lasted. I mean, they say
Exactly.
it. It's like Romeo and Juliet. You don't know how it would have turned out had they lived. Um,
Right. And I think
Hope for
people
the
always
best.
like to they always like to ask me, like, do you think Jack and Rose would have made it? And it's like, I I mean, using my best guess, I think so, because they're open communicators. They're both pretty honest, but also they didn't. I mean, there's no way of knowing.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. We don't know. I would like to think that they would have lasted. Not
Well, me
Jack and Rose.
too.
I mean, Jack and Rose, sure, I don't care. But talking about Jack and
Jack and Maddie.
Madeline.
I called her Maddie. Just Maddie, my bestie. I have a friend named Maddie.
Oh, okay.
I was like, where did that come from? Before I let you go, did you learn any little things about Madeline, about her personality? Like, I don't know, did she like tea or coffee, or did she like sweets, or is she a cat or a
um,
dog person?
I think she was a dog person and a horse person. She loved riding. Like I said, I mentioned briefly, she was athletic.
Yeah.
She liked canoeing. She liked riding. She loved tennis.
The
Um,
canoeing would make sense where she knew how to row.
yeah, exactly. And that was one of the socially acceptable recreational things that you could do on a date. I'm using finger quotes, whatever you want to call it, a
Boating.
courtship moment in Bar Harbor, is that you
Hmm.
could get some alone time on the canoe out, in the harbor or on the river or wherever, so they definitely did that. Yeah, I did I learn? I don't know. I mean, the more I learned about her, the more I'm like, what a cool person and
Hmm.
what an interesting life she led. And yeah, hmm, she made mistakes. We all make mistakes,
Everyone
but
does.
I think that she genuinely loved him. Like I said, she was already wealthy. She didn't need his money. She was already a debutante. She was from a very good family, so she didn't need more social exposure. She would have been fine if she'd never married at all. She could have just gone on and lived her happy life and still had a very luxurious and wonderful life. I think she was in love. Um,
I think
and
that's the interesting test about it too, is that
yeah,
she didn't need it.
she didn't need it. So why bother with all the headache that would come with dating someone like Jack Astor unless you were seriously committed to that relationship
If
or
you
you
didn't
believed
want
in that
to.
relationship? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So she must have been, even though she was sheltered and even though she was badgered, she a bit like Monica Lewinsky came out on the other side holding up her head high and just saying, this is my life and I'm going to claim it, and if you don't like me, okay. So good on her.
I think she would have made a very formidable modern woman.
Yes, I agree. I
I know that
agree.
sounds a little odd, but it sounds like she had she was, you said she's athletic, she had ideas, she wanted to do things.
Yeah,
And as you said, she didn't need, she wasn't chasing resources.
right, exactly.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. I think she would have been, just thinking sort of out loud. It's like I think about people like, her and the revolutionary figures of that time, especially women of that time, when it wasn't acceptable to be independent and strong and all of these horrible things that made you like, I don't know, some sort of like terrible spinster or, whatever the case may be. I always do find it impressive whenever I hear about people who are that despite their circumstances. It's like, shut up, I'm going to get in a canoe and ride this horse. And you can wait for me if you're mad about it. I mean, it's just not how women were at that time, and I have a special attraction to the figures that are kind of like, I don't like your rules.
Yes.
I will live by the way that I want. And it seems like, even though she, obviously lived by society, it seems like Madeline was a young woman of her own mind.
Exactly. Oh, that's very well put. I agree with you completely. Yeah. Yeah.
So, well,
Absolutely.
Shayna, thank you so much for coming on and dealing with my weird tech issues.
I know, it's fine. I'm so glad it worked out.
Me too. I'm really excited. Before I don't normally badger people about it, but do you want to tell me what your upcoming book's about?
Sure, I'll tell you. It is about Arabella Huntington.
That's a
If you've ever,
semi-familiar name.
um, if you've ever been to the Huntington Botanical Memorial Gardens in Pasadena, you know of that. Arabella was first married to Collis Potter Huntington, one of the big four, the railroad barons. First, she was his mistress. Then she married him.
That's the
Then,
right kind of upgrade.
yeah, then after he died, she married his nephew. She had a very interesting life. At one point, she was the wealthiest woman in Gilded Age America. So, and when
Well,
she married his nephew, I should say they were the same age. So this is another story. People who don't like this age difference are still not going to like it. But this guy was still 30 years older than her when they met, and she
that's
became his mistress, not
that's
his
pretty
wife.
normal. I,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm saying that as though we should let it be cool. It's like it was kind of the it was de rigueur of the time.
Yes, you have to accept that it was something that happened back then that probably wouldn't happen today because we have evolved. But back then, this did happen, and
Very commonly.
people didn't go like, "Oh my God, how dare you have a mistress?" I mean, it just happened. He was a very, very wealthy man with a teenage mistress who bore him a child, even. So it's about Arabella
Hmm.
and her life. She survived the Civil War as a teenager in the South, and that's where she met Collis. And it was she was a very interesting, formidable woman as well. She
Awesome.
definitely went and lived her life as she wanted because the 400 never accepted her because she was openly his mistress. So even after they got married, they were shunned. But she became a fabulous art collector, and her jewelry became after her death. Harry Winston bought all of her jewels, and it became like the beginning of his empire. That's how he started. So
Wow.
her art is in the Met and in California and San Francisco. She was a huge collector and a huge philanthropist.
Nice.
But
What's your
first,
book
she was
called?
a teenage mistress.
What's her life? What is your book called? I Was a Teenage Mistress? Because that's a great title.
What? Why didn't I think of that? That's a great title. No, it's called, I'm claiming that.
It's yours. It'll be our episode title. I Was a Teenage Mistress. Doing with your free time? Nothing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Oh no, it's called An American Beauty, but I
That's
like your
actually a good
title
title
better.
too.
Oh my god.
Oh my goodness. I am excited for that. As I said, I have a bit of um a thing for like the strong historical women. Obviously,
Yeah.
because I'm a brat myself, but I'm really interested in those stories because it's those people, especially that you look back now, it's like you've made way
Yeah.
for us
Yeah.
to be how we are.
Yeah. Yeah. She was definitely a force of nature. She just blazed her own trail because she knew she would never be accepted, and she frankly had the money to do whatever the hell she wanted, so she did.
You know what? Go for it, Arabella.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you can afford it, do it.
Exactly.
Well, Shayna, thank you so much for coming on. I'm honored to have you.
I'm so happy to be here with you. It's been so much fun. You
It
really
has been.
made me laugh.
Well, I'm glad that was accomplished. Well, Shayna was a delight, and I hope that all of you agree with me and really want to check her work out and her book. I really personally, this is just something that I'm just going to say as a person who likes reading and who likes to write in their spare time. Like, a lot of fiction can be really hard to consume sometimes, especially when you're busy, but Shayna has a really easy writing style. So if you're looking for something super easy to read, like a kind of pleasure read, definitely check out The Second Mrs. Astor, which is the book that we talked about a lot on the show today. You can go on her website to find out more about her and her work and to buy her book. That's Shana Abe, SHANAABE.com. And you can find her on Facebook. That is facebook.com/Shana Abe and twitter.com/Shana_Abe. Again, all spelled the same way, SHANA_ABE. Thank you once again, Shana, for coming on, talking about your book and your research. I hope you all decide to check it out, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.